Into DawgsCentral on a Thursday night. I am Graham Coffee. That is John Smith. We are back together talking Georgia football, athletics, maybe a few other college sports topics for the first time in quite a while, man, which is really my fault. I've been dealing with some family stuff lately, but it's good to see you. Good to be back on air. How are you doing?
Man, I'm fantastic. I am excited to be back. It's been a while since we've chatted. We have a lot to get through, it sounds like. I'm ready to jump in. Yeah.
Right on. Well, we've been getting some requests on the DawgsCentral subscriber forum to record again. So appreciate you guys. The peer pressure is a good motivator. So we asked for some question submissions, and we got a lot of great ones, and they'll kind of cover a lot of the current event topics that we want to touch tonight. So I'm going to start there with Hunter. His question first: how is Dominic Lovett doing? Anything on him? It's off-season workouts and passing drills and stuff. I don't have.
Dominic Lovett is running.
Yeah, exactly. He's
conditioning.
Yeah, he's still one of the most efficient receivers in the SEC. But a second question from Hunter is Tyler Williams a guy? For those of you that don't know, Tyler Williams is a early enrollee, true freshman wide receiver out of Lakeland, Florida, I believe, 4-star guy. Hunter wants to know if he's a guy that will make an impact in year one or if he is a developmental piece to look forward to in the future. John, do you have any thoughts on this before I answer?
I mean, for me, I feel like all of these guys have the opportunity to be an impact player. It's just a matter of how things go over the next couple of months. I think certainly physically, I think this wide receiver, not just obviously the transfers with Raiola Thomas, Dominic Lovett, huge for Georgia, but this recruiting class is a strong recruiting class from a physical standpoint. Like Tyler Williams, Anthony Evans, like these guys are going to be very good. It's just a matter of the wide receiver room at Georgia because of those two transfers. Lad McConkey coming back, it's going to be pretty deep. So it'll be interesting to see. Especially with Mike Bobo taking the reins and what wrinkles we throw. Like we'll see who gets on the field. That's my initial take.
For sure, yeah. I think that is the reasonable and responsible take. I am going to make the irresponsible take.
Yes, it's the off season. Go for it.
Absolutely, man. It's talking season, right? So I think that Tyler Williams is. I mean, don't get me wrong. He's a top 100 player in the country. I think the 24/7 composite had him at 93rd nationally. So, like, it's not like he's not coming in like a Ladd or a Stetson where he's totally off the recruiting radar. But he's only rated as the 17th wide receiver in the class and the 23rd best player in the state of Florida. I think that's too low. I think raw skills-wise, like you said, 6'3", 200 pounds, like running in the 4.5 kind of range. Go look up his highlights if you haven't seen them. The dude has an amount of like lateral quickness that a guy with his longest strides and his frame shouldn't have. And on top of that, like that's of all the kind of source type conversations I've had over the last 6 weeks, like I think he's the one that I've heard maybe the most excitement out of in terms of offensive players that have enrolled early out of this class. I even had someone compare his like raw physical abilities to one George Pickens. That might be a little bit of an overreaction, but definitely it feels like he could be an impact guy. I wouldn't be surprised if he flashes a little in G-Day and kind of follows that like that sort of A.D. Mitchell mold when we saw him sort of blow up in G-Day in 2021 and then become a significant player on that team.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Georgia has done very well over the last 3 years has been recruiting those receivers that are off the radar that just have physical skills that they can come in and mold. Like A.D. Mitchell is certainly one of them. He was the 63rd wide receiver overall, the 10th player in the state of Tennessee, but pretty, from a wide receiver standpoint, he was not on the radar. Rob McConkey obviously is a notorious story, but like I think you're exactly right. All of these guys have potential. I do think the ceiling is probably highest for Tyler Williams right now of all the folks coming in.
Absolutely, yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I think that's well said. All right, moving on. Steven has a question for us, as well as Dog God. I'm going to kind of fold these questions into one. Dog God.
I want to change my name to
excellent
Dog
username.
God. Man,
may or may not have gotten that tattoo in Destin, Florida, March of 2008 on spring break. I don't know.
I love it.
So this is all kind of quarterback room related. Steven wants to know if we've heard anything on how Carson Beck is progressing, and Dog God wants to know how we think the Bobo promotion affects the quarterback race, if at all, and if you think we would see anything different, like if the offense would look drastically different if one guy won the job versus another.
Yeah, I'll let you speak to kind of how the quarterbacks are progressing. I saw a couple of quotes from Carson Beck recently online, but I'll say for me, I don't think the Bobo hire necessarily changes the offense based on who gets the job.
Yeah.
I think the tools of the quarterback of the QBs, obviously Carson Beck is probably not going to be as mobile as a Brock Vandagriff or Gunnar Stockton. But I also don't think Georgia, I don't think Mike Bobo is going to run out there running the option with Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton if they were to win the job. So I think there is I don't think it drastically changes the offense, whoever wins the job. I also think, Mike Bobo, and I know we have some questions about Bobo. We'll talk about him a little bit later, but I mean, he's been on staff for a year. Like he's seen these guys, like, this offense, I think is solidified around particular scheme. And now it's just around actual plays and players in certain situations. And I don't think any one particular player is going to change that drastically.
Yeah, I think as far as affecting the quarterback race, the only spot I would maybe even speculate that could be possible is Bobo's dad, is a longtime high school coach in Georgia and does have some history with Gunnar Stockton, I think working with him privately as kind of a quarterback trainer.
Yeah. Mike Bobo's dad was actually my high school football coach. Shout out George Bobo. Really appreciate you for everything. Yeah, he was my high school football coach, and he taught Gunnar Stockton how to throw football. So that's how close those families are. He actually was his private QB coach.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a level of familiarity there that goes back. But like you said, Bobo's been on staff for a year, so there's a level of familiarity with Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff as well.
Correct.
I do think Carson Beck is not as agile as Stetson Bennett was. I don't think anybody on this roster is. Maybe say for Gunnar. I'm sorry, not for Gunnar Stockton. Vandagriff is probably the most mobile of these guys. But I do think we saw Beck show a willingness to run a lot when he actually came in games last year. He will tuck those zone reads, and that's really all you need in Georgia's system is just to keep that defensive end honest and keep them from crashing. We heard shortly after the title game, I posted on the DawgsCentral subscriber forum about just kind of this vibe that Vandagriff and Beck were really like buckling down in a new way and seemed really focused and all of that. On the flip side, I would say we heard those things about Gunnar Stockton, like from the moment that he enrolled, I think it was you maybe that, said at one point kind of before last season, like Stockton is watching. Someone had told you he watches more tape than anybody but Brock Bowers on the team.
Yeah, he made from what I was told, Gunnar Stockton, when he came in, initial read, there was a little bit of skepticism on staff in terms of his ceiling. And then he progressed from his own study habits, from his own just being curious, putting in the work, and learning the offense, progressed as quickly as any quarterback has ever progressed in that first offseason. So for what it's worth.
Yeah. And look, this is just a prediction, and it's not,
Mhm.
I'm not saying this to, I don't know, discount anyone's abilities or knock anyone down a peg. I think this quarterback competition is going to come down to Carson Beck and Gunnar Stockton. I think that,
I think so too.
Vandergriffel is a really talented guy. I just think that those other two are going to probably be a little more consistent with their accuracy. And that's, save for like Josh Allen. That's kind of one rule of quarterback evaluation is like you generally can't teach accuracy. You can improve it incrementally year over year. Aaron Murray did that in his career at Georgia, right? But like, I think those other two guys are a little bit more consistent, or maybe even a lot more consistent in those like 0 to 9 and 10 to 15 yard windows. And if you look at Georgia's offense, that's really what everything is based around, is like taking those kind of easy yards, for lack of a better term. And I think Carson Beck, like, I don't think anybody would really dispute that he's probably got the inside track. Like, he's definitely the favorite coming into the offseason. But
yeah,
there's a lot of practices between now and Labor Day of next year, or this year, I guess. So it's gonna be fun to watch. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and Gunnar made a living out of those types of throws in high school. I mean, I don't think people, obviously the Georgia quarterback room, I don't think it gets enough press right now. I mean, Gunnar Stockton, he's only behind Trevor Lawrence in passing yards in the history of Georgia high school football. And he's passed Trevor Lawrence in career passing TDs, and has also passed Deshaun Watson in career total TDs. So Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson were pretty good. Doesn't mean that translates to accuracy necessarily, obviously, but the dude threw it a lot, and he ran it a lot, and he had the ball in his hands a lot in high school. And I think the preparation to go along with that, have a year in the system, I could totally see him pushing for that job with Carson Beck.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Bobo. This seems like this question from J Rab Dog is a kind of a good segue. He was, I get to a recent podcast with Cole Kublik on it, and Kublik was kind of talking about the Bobo hire, and was sort of speculating that we might see more duo added to the run game, and is kind of wondering just about that, and if that will potentially help some of Georgia's running backs with their vision without getting too far into the wormhole. Duo is kind of a play that, if properly executed, allows running backs the freedom to read defenders at the second level, as opposed to your traditional zone schemes where you're going to read guys, right at the line of scrimmage. That's very, how should I put it, like layman's bare bones terms, which is what we try to do here, honestly.
Try to keep it, yeah.
But I guess it's interesting, right? Because the Bobo hire has had a lot of strong reactions, I think, in both directions. There's some people that think it's the best hire ever. I think there's some people that think it's, potentially like another James Coley type of disaster.
I haven't heard that. Yet, but
you're lying. But that's okay. Well, go ahead. What are your thoughts on it before I?
No, listen. I'll let you talk. So I think you can obviously speak to scheme, X's and O's, etc. From my perspective, Kirby Smart doesn't make this move in my opinion, on the verge, going 29-1, the last 2 seasons, back-to-back national championships, knowing what he has built and the opportunity that's in front of him. He doesn't. This, to me, this is not a James Coley decision. The James Coley decision, in my opinion, was a recruiting and a talent decision, because James Coley was a really good recruiter, and it felt like there was an opportunity to keep him around and potentially take, a little bit of a next step in the Georgia offense. I think, Kirby, he's seen Mike Bobo in the building for the last year. He's seen Mike Bobo with these players, with these quarterbacks, with these receivers for the last year. He's been in the staff meetings. Like, I think, at the end of the day, from my perspective, I don't think this is a James Coley decision for all of those reasons. Because Kirby could absolutely have gone out and gotten another offensive coordinator if he thought that was the thing to do. And so I think entrusting it into Mike Bobo's hands is an intentional decision. It's not a decision that was taken lightly. I think it's a decision that was planned when Kirby brought Mike Bobo on as an offensive analyst, that was in motion at that moment.
At least. Yeah.
A possibility. Yeah, exactly. That this is total John Tweet Sports conjecture. But my opinion is that Kirby Smart felt like Todd Monken was going to leave at some point. He had Buster Faulkner and Mike Bobo on staff, and in my opinion, it was probably going to be one of those two guys. That would have been the possibilities, right? What is my personal opinion. And when Buster Faulkner took the lead for Georgia Tech, then
that's all we need to know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because if you think that Todd Monken, as close as he is to Buster Faulkner, wasn't hanging around and being like, "Yeah, you can be the next guy up. You should hang around here." So when that happened, I think that told me that the decision had been made quite a while ago. So
yeah.
All absolutely. That being said, and I don't think, every hire is a TBD hire until you see it. Todd Monken came in. Todd Monken started Dwan Mathis in the first game after the Jamie Newman debacle in the COVID season, and Georgia was down to Arkansas at half, and then Stetson Bennett came in, and then Stetson Bennett still had to fight for his job for 2 years. So yeah. Todd Monken had to figure things out as well, and so I think people have a short memory because of what Georgia's offense has become and what Georgia's offense has done. But that being said, the talent that's here, I just don't think this is akin to a James Coley type internal promotion hire.
No, I agree. I think so. One thing I would say about Bobo is, the dude has called plays in the SEC for a decade. I've seen some people try to color this as Kirby Smart's promoting an analyst to an offensive coordinator. It's come on, guys. That's intellectually dishonest. First of all. Second of all, I think what's been interesting is I think that there is a misconception out there that Todd Monken came to Georgia and pulled a begrudging Kirby Smart out of the 1980s and 90s of offensive football and took him into a modern offensive scheme. And I think if you look at just kind of the history, and I wrote about that. I wrote about this earlier in the week on DawgsCentral. It's a free article. Anybody can go read it. But I don't think the evidence of that is contrary to that perception. If you go back and look, Georgia, when they let Jim Chaney leave to Tennessee, was kind of a moment in time where it was okay, we need to modernize this thing. Mm-hmm. And Georgia's run-pass ratio has moved more and more towards pass in 50-50 over the last 4 years, ever since he left. I think James Coley was brought on board in 2019 and really In a perfect world, if things had gone according to plan, I think the hope was for him to modernize Georgia's offense a decent amount, even despite, having really the thinnest wide receiver room that Georgia's ever had under Kirby Smart. They threw more that season than they had thrown in any of Smart's first 3 seasons in Athens. So there was this progression happening, and I think Kirby had the desire to modernize this offense. And I think a very good piece of evidence of that is when Georgia hired Matt Luke in 2019. The turning point for everything with Georgia's offense, in my opinion, is the 2019 SEC championship game against LSU. And Georgia held that LSU team to 37, maybe 35. They held them into the 30s, which was not a small achievement against, probably, in my opinion, the greatest college offense we've ever seen. But they could only score 10 points. And after the game, I think was maybe Smart's most candid press conference in his tenure. And he just said, we don't have enough receivers right now that are healthy. And just kind of was honest about what Georgia didn't have. And that's when you saw this shift to circle this back to the question on the run game scheme. Georgia under Jim Chaney was a very, it was a zone football team. They were 88, 89% zone run scheme. If those of you don't know, zone is just the offensive lineman just blocking the guy in front of them, right? You're not having guys pull from one side of the formation to another. You're not really seeing planned double teams and, pin and pulls and some of that type of stuff as much. The in-game, I think, that was put into motion in 2019 when Matt Luke was hired. Matt Luke is a guy who had a lot of gap scheme history and ran that at Ole Miss and ran that as an offensive line coach throughout his career. And you saw Georgia under Todd Monken his first year, they kind of shift into the 70 percentile range with the zone scheme. And then 2021-22, you're 50-50 zone and gap, basically. And I think that's been part of the modernization of all this is to make sure if nothing else that you can run the ball. And if the zone run isn't working, that you have that gap scheme to go to. And we saw Georgia do that in the national title game in 2021 and in lots of other instances. And it's worked for them. Point being, I think Kirby Smart hired Todd Monken to make that shift in the run scheme and to make that shift in the offensive scheme. And really 2022 was the first time where the offensive linemen had been recruited, over the last few years to where the personnel was correct to do almost everything that they wanted to do. And they trusted their quarterback enough to do almost everything that they wanted to do. And so point being, with the Bobo hire, that's been the big thing that everyone has told us is continuity of scheme, continuity of terminology, instead of asking, 50 players to learn a new language. You're really not even asking Bobo to learn a new language because he's been in that system for the last year as it is. And I think that's kind of the more interesting piece of this is Saban did that at Alabama, right? Where when Kiffin left, he basically kept the same system, and every OC that's come after Kiffin has put some of their fingerprints and wrinkles into it. But it's kind of, you're hired to run the Alabama offense. You're not hired to come and install your own offense. And I think that's what we've seen with Georgia, or where Georgia's going right now with Kirby Smart making this Mike Bobo hire. Craig Lawson has a question in the chat on YouTube. His question is, how do you process Bobo's career from 2015 to 2021? Is it cause for any level of concern? What do you think about that, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think Colorado State, to me personally, I think you have to throw that out a little bit, right? It's a G5 school. It's I don't want to fully diminish it, but at the end of the day, Bobo was a head coach, and he wasn't a great head coach, and so I think that piece of it is part of it. I think really, for me, looking at South Carolina and Auburn are the two things that you got to think about. And the way that I process that is I think it's cause for concern if you were thinking about, think about the South Carolina offensive line and the Auburn offensive line and what you have to scheme around when you have offensive lines that are that bad. It does change the dynamic of what you actually do as an offensive coordinator. And so when I look at that, I think that's the context that I put it in. And I look and say, Georgia is going to have, again, one of the best offensive lines that they've had in recent years coming into this year. And the dynamic that changes when you are protecting the quarterback is just significant. And so I will say, do I love some of the things that Mike Bobo did? Do I look at it and say, oh, well, we can excuse this because of the offensive line? No. I mean, I think there were schematic issues that he was trying to work through that were obviously present at both South Carolina and at Auburn. But I still think, the guy knows how to use the personnel that he's given in certain situations. And I think he's just been upgraded significantly at personnel at every position from where he's been. So that's how I process it. It's all TBD. I go out on Twitter and defend Mike Bobo because that's what I do on Twitter. But at the end of the day, I mean, it remains to be seen. I'll say, I wasn't thrilled at Kentucky or Mississippi State where Georgia was trying to run the ball on 1st and goal 4 times and didn't get it in. I was like, can we be a little bit more creative? Yeah, can we be a little bit more creative on the goal line? And so, some people are using the microcosm. Yeah, some people are using the microcosm of like Mike Bobo wasn't good on the goal line, and I look and I'm like, well, Georgia, Todd Monken had moments where I felt like he wasn't good on the goal line either. And so I think those moments happen. But the way I process it is I do think if you look at his schemes, he was trying to use the personnel to the best of his ability and just didn't have it. I mean, he had TJ Finley at Auburn. Like, what are you going to do with that? I just don't with that offensive line and TJ.
Well, Finley, I mean, he had the Hill kid at South Carolina who was like a 6th-year transfer from Colorado State. Like, that, and honestly, for what personnel they had, they put together a relatively productive offense at South Carolina. Like, considering I would say the sum was worth more than the whole of its parts in terms of what he got out of that offense that season. But I mean, looking at his time at Colorado State, his offenses were still very good. I mean, in 2018 or 2017, so his 3rd year there, they were 11th in the NCAA in total offense at 483 yards a game. Like offense was not the problem there. All 4 years he was there, I think his team's ranked in the top 10 in school history for yards per game in a season. So, like, by Colorado State standards, he was scheming up some of the best offense that the program has ever seen. You come back to the SEC, and at the end of the day, Kirby Smart said this after Georgia really, basically ended the Dan Mullen era at Florida in 2021. Like, you cannot scheme around talent. Like, you can do some things to help it, but at the end of the day, talent almost always wins, over scheme. Yeah. And I think you talk about Bobo's results at Auburn and South Carolina, it's really hard to win in a line of scrimmage football league like the SEC when you don't have studs on the line of scrimmage. I think, and to Craig's other – go for it. Sorry. I was just saying, I think the big question is just like Todd Monken was the best play caller I've ever seen in Athens in the moment, in game, pulling the right call and, getting the right result. But if Georgia doesn't come back and, if Ohio State doesn't miss a kick at the end of the Peach Bowl in Atlanta, like you look back on some of the sequences of play calls in that third quarter where Georgia was set up by special teams and defense to score points and score touchdowns and didn't. And they were head scratching and they weren't great. So you can pick any of these guys apart, but Georgia's had the chips kind of fall the right way for him the last couple of seasons to where Todd Monken is going to be remembered more fondly.
Yeah, I mean Georgia gets the ball in the second half versus Ohio State and comes out and run incomplete punt. It's like there are sequences like you said, 2 punts in a row and a missed field goal. I mean, there was stuff happening. I will say to Craig's other point though is like Craig says zero concerns on whether he can put up points in September, October, November. The concern is if we end up down 2 TDs in the playoff again, and in my opinion, if that happens, I think the talent is still there. But also if that happens, if Georgia's down 2 TDs in the playoff again, I think it is again a symptom of like the defense is gonna have to figure it out in those situations. Like the offense is able to win a game, but that's because of a missed field goal. And if that doesn't happen, then we're sitting here talking a lot about what Georgia did wrong on offense versus the defense.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, let's move along. Unless you have anything else to say on Bobo.
I'm have nothing to say on Bobo anymore ever until around August.
Gotcha. Okay. Perfect. Raleigh Dog wants to know any idea who might get the most reps from the freshman defensive lineman next year. And he, has heard a lot of good things about Jordan Hall. I think it's a good guess. It's a good bet. He's definitely a stud. I think the question is like, are we including some of these edge rushers in the category?
I need the definition of defensive line.
Let's include the edge rushers just to have a little fun with it.
Yeah. I don't know. What are your thoughts? What do you think?
I think if we're including the edge rushers, just from very, very early returns, I think that Samuel Mpimba, the 5-star edge out of IMG Academy, is going to be that we see play the most early.
Yeah, I think that was going to be my pick too. I think Mpimba is going to. I'll say this, and I don't mean this disrespectfully toward Nolan Smith, but I think Mpimba is going to be what Nolan Smith was supposed to be coming out of high school right from the jump, right? Like Nolan Smith ended up being that guy. Obviously played a little bit of a different position, but I think Mpimba has some similar physical traits, and Nolan Smith was, supposed to come straight out of high school and just be the dude from day one. And I think Mpimba definitely has that ability. So that's my take. I will say, it's I'm interested to see what some of these guys do though, like Damon Wilson, Jordan Hall. Like, I mean, there are some guys that it's gonna be super interesting. And then, and we're not even talking about the linebackers. Like, we can talk about that another time. We're gonna get that question, but like Raylan Wilson, CJ Allen, Troy Bowles. Like, I mean, we've got some guys that are gonna really push. Obviously, I don't think they're gonna overcome, JDJ or Smile Munda. But when you think about the Channing Tindall, Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker kind of scenario, like I see these young guys being in that mix for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that. I would also say we did have a question basically about pass rush for next year, and I kind of flows into what we were talking about. But
Michael Williams, man, people.
Yeah. Oh, dude, God, he's ridiculous.
Michael Williams is about to be a problem in the pass rush. About to be a problem.
Yeah. So the fun question here, he talks about the assortment of athletic puzzle pieces that Georgia can bring in on third down passing situations. This is June Recruiting Fearmonger, by the way, one of our favorite usernames on the DawgsCentral website. He's like, you got Jalen Walker, you got Xavier Sorey, you've got Darius Smith, you obviously have Michael. He asked if he thinks that Georgia will do a better job getting the quarterback this season. I think we both would say yes, 100% to that. And then he wants to know who starts at Jack in the college football playoff this year. So that's basically the Nolan Smith position. I think we would both expect Michael Williams to play kind of that true defensive end, side. Yeah, so he would be your end on the other side. And so who do you think the edge guy, and this is just be a starter, right? But let's say that's the person who's getting the most snaps. What's your opinion?
Darius Smith.
Really?
Is my personal
Wow.
That's my personal opinion. Yeah. I think that kid, the athleticism, like Jeff Hightoff just mentioned him about the field goal block where he was essentially in the top of Mercedes Stadium when that vertical.
I thought he blocked in my seat in the stadium.
Honestly. Yeah, me too. Where I was, I definitely thought the same. But I think Darius Smith has a real shot to push for that. It's going to be hard. I'll say that with the caveat of people might run me out of the podcast, but I think this is going to be a show me season for Chaz Chambliss. I think Chaz Chambliss is I think Georgia, I think the staff keeps putting him out there because he is like physically, like his physicality is really unmatched. But I think the athleticism of Darius Smith is gonna really push him in that Jack position.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think that. I guess when I think of the Jack, I think your first and second down guy, the guy that's on the field, probably most in your standard down type situations is somebody who can set the edge and play the run and isn't going to get washed out in the run.
Yeah.
But, has some good pass rushing upside. And I think Smith might end up being more of that like third down, second and long kind of true passing situation specialist. Just
that's fair.
If his frame, like if at 6'6", he can defend the run, that dude's going to be a freaking top 10 pick. Like, if he can really hang in there and play the run the way that Georgia asked their edge guys to do it, that's going to be absurd. I'm going to say starter. I'm going to go with Jalen Walker. Just what we saw from him in the CFP, 3 pressures against Ohio State. I think all of those came in the fourth quarter when Georgia really needed it. And then he led the team. He had 6 pass opportunities against TCU and came away with 4 total pressures, which is pretty good productivity.
Yeah.
I am going to go ahead and say I don't see any reason why he is not like Georgia's equivalent to a Dallas Turner in 2023.
Like it.
But I like the Darius Smith answer.
Man, I'm just saying there are a couple guys on this team, and again, it's the off season, and I feel like I'm doing with Darius Smith what you did with Tyler Williams, but I feel like there are a couple guys on this team that's like, man, if a couple things click and they get a little more on their frame, it's gonna be really tough to keep them off the field.
Yeah, for sure. We did have a question about Dylan Raiola, and just I guess there was a tweet that went around from a Nebraska account today saying that he canceled his visit to Georgia, and tweet says, it appears Georgia is looking elsewhere at the quarterback position as they have been sending out other 2024 quarterback offers. Guys, look, I'm going to tell you right now, if Dylan Raiola wants to come to Georgia, there's not anyone that Georgia would, pick over him in this 2024 cycle.
Yeah, there are things called there are offers, and then there are things called committable offers.
Yes.
And so I think people have to be, you have to be really in tune that when someone says they got an offer from UGA, it is, it's not always committable. Sometimes it's dependent on a guy like Dylan Raiola deciding to go elsewhere. So
yeah, absolutely. 100%. And I think with Raiola, Jason, our partner at DawgsCentral, kind of our recruiting guru, he did reconfirm this morning that Raiola is still planning on visiting Georgia on March 18th, which I believe is actually the first day of spring practice for UGA. So that's got a big nothing burger there. Don't stress over it. You'll see it. I would go as far as to say that if Raiola's recruitment ended today, I think that he would be a Bulldog. It's not ending today, so we don't. That's not me. I'm not making any official prediction here or anything like that. But I do think Georgia is in as good of a spot, or I would say a better spot as anyone in his recruitment right now. But you still have, I think, a decent period of time before he pulls the trigger on another commitment, especially considering he decommitted once. I don't think he's, I think wherever he commits is where he's going, and he's going to be very careful about making sure he's 100% sure that's where he wants to be before he makes any announcement.
Yeah, the only thing to keep an eye on, right, is that he is 2024 and he does have an uncle on staff in Nebraska. So I think there are people, I think there's a little bit of wait and see what Matt Rule is able to do. But I personally, I will be shocked if Raiola decommitted from Ohio State to go to somewhere like Nebraska. I think, personally.
I mean, that'd be quite the business decision. Yeah. So I'm going to kind of use this to segue into talking about the SEC at large a little bit more. Raleigh Dog had another question basically saying, Tennessee surprised a lot of folks this past season, but he is not sold on Hyper as an evaluator, and he thinks they will be the second biggest disappointment in the league to their fan base after Florida next season. Do we have any early predictions for good and bad surprises next season? You can make this SEC related or any other teams nationally that you're just like already feeling the vibe for.
So are we talking about?
We're talking about 2023.
Yeah, but are we talking about sleepers? Are we talking about?
You're talking about. Give me 1 or 2 teams that you think will pleasantly surprise, and 1 or 2 teams that you think will, are going to be way overrated in the preseason versus where they finish the season.
Yeah, I'll do the overrated first. I think Florida State and Penn State are both going to be overrated, especially Florida State. I mean, there are some way too early preseason polls that have Florida State as high as number 4.
Yep.
Looking
at one right now.
Yeah. I think Florida State and I also think Penn State. Like I think Penn State, I think there is a building off of this past season, the 11-2, but I think Penn State they may still end up going 11-2, and I still think they'll be overrated. Just because of what the Big Ten is going to be. Pleasant surprises, I'm going to go – I don't know if it's a pleasant surprise. I mean, maybe people are ranking them high already, but I think LSU is going to surprise people again. I think Brian Kelly is a really good coach, and I think Jaden Daniels is going to probably take another step forward. And I think I don't know, for my second, like, pleasant surprise – I think I'll probably go with not picking them to like make the college football playoff or anything like that. But I think Washington, I think being able to keep their offensive coordinator from going to Alabama, I think keeping that staff intact, Michael Penix Jr. coming back, like I think Washington's going to be a real pleasant surprise for that fan base.
I agree with that. I think that you're talking Penix thing, and I was going to say I think Oregon, they got Bo Nix back another season.
I mean,
and I think like everyone looks at that and says they're going to be back in playoff tension. Dude, the strength of that team was the offensive line. That offensive line did as good a job against Georgia as anybody that I saw all year.
Yep.
That offensive line, they lose 2 tackles, a starting guard, and a starting center. And I just like
that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think back on like 2008 Georgia, right? Like there was so much skill talent and some great linebackers and defenders coming back, but like they were replacing 80% of their offensive line, and you saw how that went. I'm always stock up on teams that return a large chunk of their offensive line production from the year before. So I think Oregon is going to be a disappointment. I would say that I do think, like, I don't know, I mean, I think the standard for Alabama every year is to win a national title, right? And anything less is usually a disappointment for them. And I don't think that they're going to do that this year. Like, I think that they're going to be – I don't think they'll make the playoff again next year. Losing Bryce Young is a big deal. Losing Will Anderson and Gibbs is a big deal. Like, they lost a lot, and they've recruited a lot of great talent, but and I'm not sold on Tommy Reese in any stretch either. So we'll see. But
I think Alabama fans are going to be happier with Kevin Steele than they're going to be with Tommy Reese.
I would agree with that for sure. I think pleasant surprise. Last year there was all these expectations on Utah kind of preseason as like a sleeper playoff team. And I don't know that they'll make the playoff, but I think they'll definitely beat Florida week 1, which kind of sunk their season last year. And then, I mean, like they were Pac-12 champions and they took the wood to USC twice. The preseason poll I've seen them in has them at 13 right now. I would kind of put them like maybe top 7 team in the country with a potential outside chance to make the CFP. I just think, they're the guys they get back there are a lot of the guys that made them good this past season, and they get healthy again. So, that's kind of my positive or upside team.
Yeah. We had a question from Every Last Word in the YouTube chat about Colorado. Man, I think Deion's gonna have a rough go of it.
It's gonna take time.
Yeah, well, and he's got to go to TCU. He's got to play at Oregon. He's got to play at Utah, at UCLA. I mean, I don't think Colorado is going to pleasantly surprise anyone personally in Deion's first year.
Right, for sure. I would say, I don't know. As far as SEC teams, I think it's going to be like I think Tennessee kind of has to take a step back this upcoming season. I think you get a bounce back year out of Sam Pittman in Arkansas. You get a fallback year out of Shane Beamer in South Carolina.
I like those picks. Yeah. To continue on Every Last Word's question about Colorado, long term, what's your long term view of Deion in Colorado?
I think he'll be successful there. I do. I mean, I don't think he'll be like
No.
college football playoff successful, but I think
Yeah.
by the standards of Colorado football, there's been like one era of real national relevance in the history of that program, and I think that they can compete in the Pac-12. Like
Yeah.
especially with USC and
Especially
UCLA leaving.
nailed it. Especially with USC and UCLA leaving, and like maybe SMU coming in. Like the Pac-12 is trying to get. It's like they're trying to cobble together a couple of teams to come in, and but I think Colorado, like their best season in the last gosh, it's got to be
20 years.
probably what, like 20 years. Was 1-10-4 season in 2016, and they've had losing seasons every year, except that one since 2007. No, since 2006. Sorry, 2006. They've had one winning season. And I don't mean like they didn't have any like 6 and 6s. Every other season was a losing season. And so long term, I mean, Dion getting this team to 8-4 in that Pac-12, or maybe a 9-3 in there. Absolutely possible. And I think that's an absolute win for Colorado.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
I think that you'll have Colorado, Utah, and Oregon kind of duking it out in the new Pac-12 annually. And I think college football is a little bit more fun when Colorado is good. I mean, I may say that selfishly because I live out here in this region, and they are a recognizable brand that does have a little more like they have a little more East Coast pull to them, because you get a lot of like East Coast people that come to go to school out there and live in a pretty place. Yeah, I think that they will be able to get there, and I think like if you look at starting out with with your two boundary corners is Cormani McLean and Travis Hunter is pretty good, right? Like there's going to be some pieces of that team that I think can create problems, and I think they will probably have like a big upset somewhere along the way in 2023. I just think the depth is still a long way off, and it'll be a while. Not a while, but I think it'll take a couple of years for them to be able to kind of get to that like 7-8 win mark. All right. I think we've answered all the questions here. So we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the biggest story in college sports lately, right? Which is the whole Alabama Brandon Miller thing. I mean, I think all of you watching have to know at this point probably what we're talking about, but to be super succinct, an Alabama basketball player, Darius Miles, was charged in a capital murder case, 6 weeks ago? Early to mid-January. And that was kind of that. It was a bad, tragic incident. But, we all thought that was kind of the extent of it. Comes out on Monday in some court filings at star Alabama player Brandon Miller. You're talking like a dude that's 6'9" with like guard skills. He will be a top 4 or 5 pick probably in the upcoming NBA draft. Turns out he drove a car, his own car, to the scene that had a gun in it that was the property of Darius Miles, and that gun then fired 11 shots on the Tuscaloosa Strip. 2 of those shots actually went into Miller's windshield. So he could have died in the situation as well, which I think is kind of being forgotten at times. But a mother died and leaves behind a child, and her boyfriend was also fired upon. And all of this came down to basically Miles and one of his friends trying to hit on the young lady in the bar, and her telling them to move along instead of dealing with rejection. like an adult. They fired a gun 11 times in a public spot while admittedly, like, basically blackout drunk. So the controversy here is that Miller is still playing. He put up 41 points last night, including hitting the game-tying shot to take Alabama to overtime against South Carolina, and then the game winner in overtime. John, what are your thoughts on the situation?
Listen, I mean, first of all, it's just sad. The whole situation is sad. A mom losing her life, kid losing his mom, young guys who had a lot of promise in their life, opportunity in their life that other folks don't have. And to throw that away, in that situation is just sad. So I think we should acknowledge that, right? Like, at the end of the day, no matter Brandon Miller's involvement or situation, the situation is sad. I personally, there has been so much talk on the internet about the legality of the situation, right? So you have like all of these people talking about the legality of Brandon Miller's involvement. It wasn't his gun. He didn't hand it to Darius Miles. There was nothing that the authorities could charge him with, et cetera, et cetera. I still don't understand how this guy and his coach, based on the knowledge that his coach issued a statement that they've had knowledge of his involvement in the situation for
the athletic director
and his athletic director. I don't understand how there's zero accountability and zero consequences for being involved in this situation. Separate from the legality, I don't care if he can legally be charged with anything or not. He got a text from his friend. He would have gone back to pick up his friend either way from all reports. But he got a text from his friend that basically said, "I need you to bring me my gun," in very different language. And he went to that scene. And he allowed however that transpired, he allowed his friend to retrieve the firearm from the car. And then once the shots were fired, he did cooperate with the authorities, but that was after, from his own lawyer's statement, he had cooperated with authorities after he realized that someone had been injured in the situation. And man, I just don't understand. I don't understand how the coach can come out and say, can't control where everyone is at every one time, wrong place, wrong time, completely dismissive. Athletic director issue a statement that was also relatively dismissive while trying to walk back the coach's statements. And this kid just go out there and continue to act like the team, the university, continue to act like nothing happened, roll him out onto the court and play. And Alabama fans can say whatever they want. They can say, well, he can't be legally charged with anything. And, well, he didn't know about the gun or whatever. You were involved in a murder of a woman in Tuscaloosa, a murder. You were on the scene. And at the end of the day, I just don't, for the life of me, I don't understand how there are no consequences for that. I'm not saying you should sit him for the rest of the year. I don't know. But to literally just act like, oh, well, we couldn't control where people were and like we're just moving on, completely appalled. And for my Alabama fans who undoubtedly will listen to this and try to come at me on Twitter, imagine that Stetson Bennett or anybody on Georgia's football team, because Alabama, number 2 team in the country, so we'll equate it to the best team in college football. Imagine anyone on that team being involved in this situation and just showing up at practice and just rolling out in the game. How you would feel in that situation. Just imagine that, and you can't tell me that you wouldn't feel the same way, that there needs to be some consequences.
Oh, no, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think, like, remember the outrage from Alabama fans over the Cam Newton case and the outrage from lots of fans, right? Like,
yeah,
100%. I mean, that was a passing of money, and that was something that would be 100% legal today with NIL rules. But I mean, the irony there is like, that was a case where it was like, oh, well, New didn't know. There's this kind of plausible deniability that was going on there with his dad and all that. I tweeted about this earlier. What has bothered me the most about this, I think, is like watching certain obviously Alabama fans, but like I think what's more bothersome is watching like certain media members that are, that cover Alabama or connected to the university in some way. And there were some things that I think got talked about or thrown around or speculated on Monday or Tuesday around the Miller case. There was people saying that like he blocked the car in of the victim and some of that stuff. And I don't think that's true, right? Like that doesn't seem to be true, at least from the facts that I've been able to find. But at the same time, the point is like there was this huge kind of witch hunt that happened amongst some of these Alabama adjacent folks when this statement came out by Miller's lawyer released a statement kind of in response to a lot of the articles and reports, these scathing editorials that have been put out to kind of admonish Alabama for not disciplining him. And all this too, like Nate Oates got up on the podium at a press conference on Monday and was asked about the situation in his most nonchalant a manner as you could ever imagine, was like, oh yeah, we knew about it. Like it, we knew he was there. You can't control what these kids do outside of practice. Wrong place, wrong time, right? Like that's basically what he said. Which is something that you say, if a kid is in a room that, a cop busts into because the RA on the hall in the dorm smells marijuana smoke or something like that, right? Like It's not what you say about a murder beef. I am really bothered by the fact that you have all these Alabama journalists who were so quick to jump on national media and yell at them for jumping to conclusions. And then they take the statement from Miller's lawyer, his defense attorney, at 100% face value. And I'm not a lawyer, right? But like I know a bunch of them, and I know that in something like this, it's maybe more important what that statement doesn't say than what it does say, right? And in that statement, like you see, like the attorney doesn't say that Miller did not know the gun was in the car. And he would, trust me, he would say it if that was true. The attorney also does not say that Miller hadn't read the text message that requested the gun to be delivered on the scene. And that text message also implied like, hey, there was some back and forth. There was a confrontation that's happening and some shit's about to go down. Like
absolutely.
Those two things might not make him legally culpable. They do make him morally culpable, in my opinion. Like there's 1,000 different decisions he could have made in that situation. He made the one decision that ended in someone dying, which is showing up on the scene with the right.
Yeah, just sad. And I think Alabama fans should be ashamed of digging in their heels so much to defend a player that they would take a defense attorney's an attorney's like statement at complete face value. I mean, God, Graham, Trump's attorney said that he didn't pay Stormy Daniels too, right? It's like, come on. There are plenty of situations where attorneys just come out and just say, and I agree with you. It's what's not said. It's what's not said that you need to pay attention to.
Right.
So there's a take on Alabama. We got a couple of more questions if we want to grab those right before we take off.
Yeah, let's hit them.
Rhett wants to know if there's anything new on Shoe.
No. I mean, not other than what we reported on the DawgsCentral website, which was basically, yes, he's having a conversation with the Eagles. The people that I've talked to see it more as like this is a chance for him to have some experience interviewing, to expand the Georgia football network a little bit. You're talking about a guy who, I mean, Dan Lanning was in this same role a couple years ago, and now he just came off of, a really good first season as head coach at Oregon. Like, Schumann is gonna get a big job in the next year or two. So this is good experience for him to go interview. But I would still be very surprised if the Eagles offered him that job, just because he's the only candidate, it appears, they're talking to who has not coached in the NFL and not ever played in the NFL. Like, he's never been in an NFL locker room. And in terms of how you communicate and some of that, it's very different between the college and the pros.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, he's never actually run a defense by himself. He's been a co-DC. He's had a partner. I think it's a big leap.
Yeah.
But I also think, I love the experience he's getting. I love the visibility he's getting. I personally would not be surprised if he ended up getting the job. Like, in terms of just like, we've seen this happen in the NFL where they take a young, like, hot commodity and kind of put them in a situation and see what they can do. But all of those situations, Joe Brady is a good example, where Joe Brady was a passing game coordinator for the Saints before he was at LSU, and then he went back as the offensive coordinator of Carolina. So I just think that lack of NFL experience is probably what's gonna keep him. And if Kirby Smart is giving him sound advice, which I trust is happening, I mean,
sure,
yeah, come on, come back for another year, and you're gonna end up, in a really good job, another year or two, and you're gonna end up in a really, really good job.
Yeah, and you already are in a really, really good job as well.
Correct. I mean, you're 32 and you're making a ton of money.
Calling plays at Georgia.
Yeah, definitely. He would be crazy to jump in that pressure cooker. All right, how long until USC or UCLA is a threat in the Big Ten?
I guess that would be a threat to win the league. I think it's going to be longer than people expect.
I think so.
I don't know that UCLA will ever be a true threat.
Mm-hmm.
I think USC – look, man, what do I know about Lincoln Riley, dude? I know that his defense is – like his next good defense will be his first ever as a head coach. And I know that his teams usually struggle on the line of scrimmage against good competition. I think that, aside from the SEC, that the Big Ten is the most like the line of scrimmage focused league. So, I think it's going to take a while. Like, against a team like Iowa State, I could see them getting into a shootout kind of situation, and like maybe they come out on top if the turnover battle falls their way or whatever. But like, I think against a Michigan or even a Penn State, or even like, as funny as this is going to sound to say it, like even a normal functioning Iowa, like I think that they might get bludgeoned to death on the line of scrimmage and really, really, really struggle. That whole Caleb Williams, I'm going to run around in circles for a half hour and then find a receiver downfield kind of gig, like doesn't, I don't think it's going to fly against some teams with better edge rushers and athletes. Can you hear me?
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Nothing left to say. I think it's a line of scrimmage league, and USC and UCLA are not line of scrimmage teams yet, so they're going to compete in that league. It's also a ball control league, right? Like you don't have a situation where you're going up and down the field, in like you have in some of these other in the Pac-12 offenses, right? So ball control league, offensive line league. It's going to take a lot for them to threaten to win it.
I agree.
And I mean, let's be honest, like USC, I'm not high on USC actually win the Pac-12 anytime soon if they stayed there. So I think Utah last year, I think Washington or Oregon this year. Like I just think there are teams that are built better to compete with them.
I agree with that.
Cool.
All right. Well, I think we have covered all the ground that we had to cover. It was really fun getting back on air with you, and we're gonna try to get onto a consistent recording schedule so that you guys know where to find us and when to find us every week. So stay tuned for that, and we'll have an announcement there as soon as we can. Yeah, you can find Jon on Twitter at JohnTweetsSports. You can find me at Dog Out West, and you can find both of us at DawgsCentral.com. We answer questions all day, every day over there in the subscriber forum. So if you have some curiosity, or honestly, if you want some of the, I think, best UGA intel and analysis that you're going to find anywhere, we are still running some specials and stuff like that. If you want to come check us out, you can get on there for a year for just $60, but that's going to change soon. So
it is. Come on in.
Yeah, come on us, and hope to see you guys over there. And we will see you back here on the YouTube channel and podcast feeds very soon.